with the traditional opening.
Sego, Seguego. Karuhia Yodne Yujats. Kanasadage Rono, Dano, Akwesasne Lono. It's an honor to be here today in the birthplace of myself and my sisters and my father's family. I was 1 year old when I left this place. I didn't register for Indian status with Akwesasne Mohawks until I was about 20 years old and my dad was almost 50. We lived out reserve here. We were off reserve Indians in another traditional nation of Onondaga, Undage. I grew up with Onondaga, Mohawk, Oneida, Seneca, and American children. And I was educated by the Americans in their school system. I lost my language when I started kindergarten, and I graduated in '82 with a Regents New York State diploma. And after 5 years of living in the city with my now husband, we struggled as city Indians, also known as urban, off-reserve, non-status, Ongwehoe, Longhouse, Ancestor, clan, no man. And so I've seen it all. And I returned recently to go to 2 funerals of my first cousin with the Oneida of New York. Ray Hellbrader is my first cousin's cousin. And so I grew up with many people of the Oneida Nation who are still family, and they don't live as close to our original way of living, the values and traditions that we learn from our mothers. We are all matriarchs, if we're fortunate enough to have a record that says that we are. Many of us who lost our language, like myself, grew up watching people go through ceremony and wondering, what were they really saying? So, after my sister Carlene disappeared and was found in 1988, my parents had returned to Akwesasne and built a house there in the Descheneaux district. If you don't know the background of that, you can look that up. In 1987, after stopping briefly here from Syracuse to St. Regis over at Bologna, John Martin maybe is his name, I forget, but I lived there temporarily. And my husband could either stay in Syracuse or join me, but I brought my 18-year-old daughter and one in my stomach, and I was looking for home. Always looking for home. As situations happen, my grandmother Harriet Heard said to me one time when I visited her, there's only room for one family in each house. She didn't have to say more than that to me, and I knew it was time to move on. Suddenly I got a call from my sister. My 2 older sisters were already in Kanasadage. They married men from there. My sister said, hey, there's an apartment in Oka. I knew Oka. My mother was born just on the other side of the Oka Ferry, near the nuns, near the convent. She was born there with her 10 siblings. She's the last survivor at 81, and I'll be losing my mother soon. And she's a registered member of the Akwesasne Mohawks. And I am now a transferred member of the Kanasadage Mohawks. But we hold title and clans. We just stand outside the longhouse. And so I want to remind you all that we are family, and life has taken us. I've been privileged and honored and have a heavy heart for all the testimonies I heard in the private rooms of the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And we are hurting our own people. The colonies of the US and Canada still get their orders from Her Majesty. If you don't believe that, look at the news last night and Trump was just talking and there's a woman behind him, not interested. They're just playing. If you don't see that, then clean off your glasses or wipe your eyes with the softest deer hide. Open your ears, close your mouth, and just observe who we have become today. I did not plan to be here today. And I know part of the Handigara Wadekwa is to always give thanks to the people after we give thanks that we even woke up this morning. Some people woke up to great sadness and tragedy and their fires are scattered. I will be attending a funeral here for my husband's family who loved me just because I loved him. This is family. This is what we have to remember when we look at this. You know, when I watch the news, because I always watch the news with my dad as a kid, and I remember Martin Luther King. I remember he got the Nobel Peace Prize the year I was born in 1964. Same year the Beatles came over too. Now we got a beetle invasion in our most sacred trees, so come on people. It's time we start to ask ourselves, who's going to stay in our houses and who will we be able to invite in to stay? So these are my words and I send this to you with love. And I'm shaking inside because I didn't plan to be here at this podium. And I am. And I'm home. And my home is wherever my feet take me. And I want to leave you with one message. He wants to build a wall, and he's going to send his troops to the most vulnerable places along the border. For me, that's my friends down in, and excuse me if I don't say it right, Taraoram Nation. Half of it is in the US and the other half is in Mexico. Those families are mixed, indigenous people. Where do you think he's going to send his troops? And Canada's already talking. Watch the news, it's all there. I don't make this up and I'm no messiah. I don't want to be president and I don't want to be prime minister and I don't want to be an elected council chief. And it scares me to think that I would have to go into my most natural role as a condoled clan mother and not let somebody come in to the house because our sisters are crawling on the earth still and missing. And our men are joining them. So if they can't crawl in that door of the most sacred house we have, how are we really going to survive? Because we are colored, we are brown, we are not white. And the White House is going to clean its house first. So we need to take care of our own. Nya goa, kanalungkwa. Have a great meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. That was the most different Thanksgiving address I've ever heard. It was really heartwarming. Thank you very much for that, Cheryl. Grand Chief? Welcome. Nice to see you guys here.
Good morning to all of you. Thank you for your patience this morning. Welcome to our guest, Sego. I want to thank the organizers, the Undawadatwi program, and Dolly McDonald, who's been assisting us with this work that we have been doing on this collaborative process on the Indian registry system. So we have been doing some work here at the Mohawk Council on been doing a review of the Akwesasne membership code and how the operation of the administration of the code goes and what work that the Office of Vital Statistics does. We had done some work last year, a review to look at how we can better be efficient on the administration and of our Akwesasne membership code, so we do determine who our members are. And it was at that time, as that work wrapped up, that the Government of Canada had announced that they were going to be doing this collaborative process, which is in response to the Descheneaux case, which was a legislation that was introduced in 2016. And then earlier, late last year, the government said that we're going to do this collaborative process and engage with communities on how they should implement the court decision as it relates to Indian registry under the Indian Act. So that's really how this project started. Undawa Datwi and Dolly, through her the work she does with us, has been assisting in rolling this out, and the staff at Undawa Datwi have been assisting. We've had a number of focus meetings thus far. Myself and other members of the team have been on the radio, and then went back subsequently on the radio as well, talking about this amendment, this collaborative process in which we have undertaken. And today we welcome two individuals from the Department of Indigenous Crown Relations who have come down from Ottawa. We might add we're a little bit late, but I'm sure that the roads were probably a contributing factor to that as well, and perhaps even the border, which we all know that we deal with all the time. But to assist in the facilitation of the discussion today, to hear what you have to say as community members, as technicians and people that are related, that work in relation to whether it be our membership office or our self-government negotiation work that we're doing going forward, or just as community members and having an interest in how this potential changes to legislation will impact our community as a whole. So this morning, as we go through, we will be working through that in a bit of a presentation that we have. I'm not sure if our guests will be doing a presentation as well, and then we will be looking at a series of questions. And this information will help us as the Mohawk Council to make the final report and submission to the Government of Canada that will then assist in shaping how this legislation will be rolled out and impact all communities across the country. Now, we do know that as a community on the border and a community with the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, the Mohawk Nation Council of Chiefs and the Australian Mohawk Tribe, we do have varying systems, whether it be hereditary or legislatively, of determining who members are in our community. And really, these are some of the perspectives that we're hoping that you can bring to this discussion and help our friends from the government understand how this will impact our community, especially being, on the border. The border rights in which we have as being Haudenosaunee people that have existed here much more before the Indian Act was introduced, and they start determining who members are and then what rights, we'll say that rights unquote, are carried with that. So again, I want to welcome all of you. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to join us today. Welcome to our guests. Thank you very much for coming down and having a session with us. I look forward to this morning's conversation. And Peter's going to go a bit more of the agenda as well. But I will welcome, I guess, our guests to introduce themselves, and if you have any opening remarks as well. Claudette Dumont Smith, who is one of the representatives, and Chad Tiknosway. Yeah, sorry. And I was talking to Dolly earlier, and I said, "Is that Tiknosway or is that?" She said, "No, it's Tiknosway." Welcome to both of you. Thank you very much. We appreciate it again. And on behalf of myself and the council, we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Grand Chief. I'd like to introduce Claudette, if you could come up and say a few words as a special representative from the minister. And if she wants to point to Chad to say something, well, it's up to you. But if you want to sing a song, we did have some karaoke earlier. Chad, I know that you've been a singer.
Thank you.
Cool.
Hello, bonjour. I'm sorry that I'm late. I don't like to be late. Being a nurse by profession, we were not allowed to be late. So I want to begin by acknowledging the Mohawk people on whose territory we are meeting today. I'm very familiar with your territory. My sister used to work at the casino for 5 years, so I used to come down here a lot. So it's a pleasure to be here again today. I also want to thank you for participating in today's consultation event and your valued input on Indian registration, band membership, and First Nation citizenship. As I mentioned, I'm from Kitigan-Zibi. I'm Algonquin. I'm a nurse by profession, and I've been working with my people since the 70s. So I worked at the community level, and following my move to Ottawa, not Ottawa, I live in Gatineau, I worked for a lot of organizations. I was the first executive director of the Indian and Inuit Nurses of Canada, and then I worked for various organizations as a consultant. And I traveled across Canada several times, this being my third time. So I'm pretty much attuned to the needs of our people. So we're here to talk about Bill S-3. And Bill S-3, which is about Indian registration, band membership, and First Nation citizenship, was an act that received royal assent December 22, 2017. So it's new. And the reason why that came about was because, as the chief was mentioning, it was a person by the name of Descheneaux, an Abenaki from Quebec, who brought to the Quebec Superior Court that there was inequities in how his children and his sister's children were treated by way of the Indian Act. And the Quebec Superior Court agreed with that, and told the government of Canada that indeed there was discrimination and inequities, and they had to deal with that. So he brought forth the cousins issues and the siblings issues, but the senators and other Indigenous groups said that it didn't go far enough. They wanted to look at more in-depth inequities and discrimination that still existed within the Indian Act. So they wanted before the full S-3 would be enacted, they wanted to look at all these inequities. So some came into force December 22, 2017, and what we are meeting about, what we are consulting about is about, and Chad will be talking about that in a bit too, is about the 1951 cutoff, and about the other inequities that were not addressed by Descheneaux, and also about assuming control of Indian registration. So those are broader amendments to S-3 that are not in force now, but will come in force after the consultation. And the consultation is something that I'm participating in as the Minister's Special Representative. And I'll give you a bit more information on that. So, and that's what I'm involved in is that second phase. So just to talk a bit now about that collaborative consultation process that we're in. It was not designed by the government alone. There was a co-design process that took place between October 2017 and March 31, 2018. And what happened during that co-design phase is that the government worked with Indian organizations. I know my tribal council, the Anishinaabe Tribal Council, partook in that. Anyway, they worked with different organizations across Canada and asked them to provide input on how this part, this phase 2, should be designed. So that's how this process rolled out. On May 10 of 2018, not even a year ago, a report was presented to Parliament about how this would play out. And an Indigenous advisory panel was established to guide the process. So on that Indigenous advisory panel that's still in place today, that's guiding the work of this collaborative process, there's a representative from the Assembly of First Nations, there's a representative from the Native Women's Association of Canada, and one from the Congress of Aboriginal People. In June about 9 months ago, there was an announcement of how the consultations would take place across Canada, and that's when I was asked to be the Minister's Special Representative. And during June to September of last year, people from the department, the Canadian Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, traveled across Canada to different communities and explained what all this was about. So they really brought that information forward to the people and said, this is what the collaborative process is about, this is what will be discussed, and this is what we need answers for your advice on. That took place, as I mentioned, June to September, and they're still taking place as of today. I think this is considered a community session, correct? So they've been taken in place throughout the year. Big events that are taking place, and we've had 5 so far, is our regional events. And at the regional events, it's the leaders that are sent a letter, the chiefs are sent a letter, and they're asked to come to these regional events. And again, it's to talk about the impact of the Indian Registration Band membership in First Nation citizenship, and again, to provide advice. We've had 5 regional events. We've had one in the Yukon, we've had one in Northwest Territories, Prince Albert, Ontario, and where was the other one? What was the 5th regional event?
Yukon, Northwest Territories, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. We had 2 in Ontario.
We had 2 in Ontario, yeah. I've been traveling a lot. As a matter of fact, in the month of February, I think I'll be home only one day. So we're having another one on the in Halifax, and then in Halifax, and then we'll be moving west to Regina and Edmonton, etc., etc. So in total, before the end of March, there will be 15 regional events. And again, it's the leaders that are invited to come, but they do send other participants to come to these events. 2 people from here were at the Ottawa event a couple of weeks ago. And that was, Ottawa event was the one with the least number of participants. Why, I don't know, but that was much more people in Yukon, NWT, and in Toronto. There's also expert panels that will be struck up. There will be one in Moncton, I believe, that will be next week, and there will be another one taking place in Saskatchewan. Initially, we had planned for 5, and those events were inviting scholars, people who had written on the subject of band membership and Indian registration. We were asking them to come and provide us their input as well, and there was not enough interest, so we will be having 2, as I mentioned, one in Moncton and one in Saskatchewan. There is also an online consultation whereby people can go online and respond to a questionnaire that was developed by the CERNAC staff, and again, it's all about this issue. There will be input as well sought from other governments and provinces and territories. So once all that is done, and I'll be completing all my travels by the end of March, we're going to be analyzing all the reports that come in from the sessions such as this, from the regional events, from the expert panels, and we'll be doing an analysis as well of what comes in by way of the online submissions. And we'll look at that, and we'll develop a report, and that report I will present it to the minister. It'll be a progress report, and then she will move it forward, through the ranks of Parliament. So we're here today is to address those delayed amendments, that the Phase 2 part that I just mentioned, and that's the implementation of that 1951 cutoff, and the First Nations exclusive responsibility for determining membership and citizenship. And I heard from your chief there that you're already working, that work is well underway, and about the remaining inequities in the Indian Act. And Chad, you're going to be speaking a bit on that. So I'll just sum up by saying my role as the Minister's Special Representative is to engage in that Canada-wide fact-finding mission to obtain input of First Nations on the above-noted 3 streams that I just mentioned. And your responses to the following questions will really help me to develop a report and recommendations that are reflective of what you've said, and guidance on how the government should move forward with removing the delayed amendments and putting into place that the full S-3, because right now it's just partially in place. So there will be, I think, a time for questions and answers, and I'll let Chad provide you more technical information. So Miigwech, thank you very much.
Chad Kignasway. The bios of both our speakers and our representatives from Canada, of course, are in your packages. So if you want to review what their accomplishments have been so far, it's quite impressive. And of course, if you want to email them, they're prepared to do so. And but anyway, here's Chad. thank you for that, Claudette. I think there probably would have been more people if, in Ottawa, if they known that that's also part of our traditional territory too. So acknowledgement of not only the Algonquin people, but also of the Haudenosaunee people. I always come back to the whole idea of one dish, one spoon, wampum belt.
Yes.
And again, I want to thank Pam Brown for wearing purple like me, so everybody else didn't get the memo. And happy birthday, Pam. Thank you. I will. Don't worry about it. Okay, I think Chad's putting something on right now. I do want to thank you because we do have had a number of 3 focus meetings, and of course, I'd like to introduce the table. And Dolly walks away. Dr. Rose Elmo McDonald, okay, she's our consultant. She's putting together the report, all the work that's been done on the whole idea of what Bill S-3, how it affects us, and getting all the minutes, and we should have a Cadillac of a report. But also, we have the manager of OVS, of course, is Jackie Benedict, and we also have the membership person responsible, wears a number of hats, Carol LaFrance. And I also want to thank both Rachel for organizing the events and what have you, but I also would like to thank Chelby Willie for doing a lot of the back work and whatever, carrying on a lot of the heavy load. Shelby, it'll reflect in her evaluation, of course. Just to let you know. Okay, Chad? Welcome. Okay.
Sorry, we're just trying to figure out the agenda. This mic's really short. I have a loud voice, so I'll just talk loud. I need to use the microphone. All right, so I was going to present a backgrounder on S-3 and the whole collaborative process, but I understand that someone has already devised their own presentation, so they're going to go ahead with that. I'm just going to give you a really quick introduction of myself. I'm considered a subject matter expert. I've been studying First Nations identity, the construction of identity, the legal construction of identity, cultural identity for almost 12 years now. So I have a total of 5 post-secondary degrees. I've got a degree in sociology, a degree in political science, I have a pre-law degree, a law degree, and a master's in law degree. And throughout that entire time, I focused my studies on identity. So theoretically, how is that constructed, not just here in Canada, but from other societies across the globe, such as those found in Africa or Australia. And when I got to law school, I continued that, but on a legal perspective, so I started studying a lot of Aboriginal law in Section 35 and the rights pertaining to Section 35. And I brought forward the stuff that I learned in my undergraduate degrees forward and tried to understand how identity is legally constructed. So I work with a number of national Aboriginal organizations, and I ran into my former director at INAC while I was traveling across the country, learning about identity, and she said, hey, you seem like a really great guy, I could use you on my team. So she asked me to come and work on this particular file, so I did. So I've been working on S-3 since 2016. It's now 2019, so we're heading on to the 3rd year of this process. Like Claudia had said, we had done a number of stages in terms of the work that we're doing here, and that all started with the S-3 engagements, and that's going across the country, collecting feedback on the bill that was introduced in the House. Following that, we did the co-design phase, and that was an opportunity for communities as well as organizations to help design how we were going to consult. And now we're on that consultation process. So that's just a quick synopsis of who I am and my little expertise coming into this. And throughout the consultation process, I was appointed to assist and advise our Minister Special Representative throughout her journey across the country. We just got back from the territory, so we spent most of January both in Yukon and Northwest Territories, and my body is kind of acclimatizing back to the south. It's so damp down here, like I can never get warm. Even though it's bitterly cold way up north, the coldest temperature that we experienced was -46, and that was really cold. That was a dry cold. but down here, even though it's -12 or something, it's so damp. You have no idea how damp the air is down here. It makes things super cold. Anyway, so that's that. I'm gonna let the agenda progress on the next presentation.
Thank you, Chad. We're going to try to have a concise, we're going to press, I said, maybe agenda. And so what I want to go through right now is that, of course, we're going to have a presentation done by the panel, which we've done at the focus meetings. And now we're going to do a plenary session with completely with all the 3 questions, and we'll try to get your responses for that. And at the end, we'll try to have at least a question and answer period with our representatives and with our panel, so that we could try to answer a lot of questions concerning band membership, registration, citizenship, all of these questions. And of course, when you talk about those and you talk about the processes that Canada has tried to engage us into, whether it's consultation, whether it's engagement, when it's collaboration approach, it somewhat comes off, somewhat in a sense, from my perspective anyway, that they already have something planned. And so, and from what I've heard from people who say, no, this is something from all of these meetings, then they will provide what the findings for Bill S-3 that will go to Parliament to become law. So there's a lot of opportunity, I guess, to sort of input into it. There are a number of, and going through all the meetings going across the country, I know that you've met with a lot of First Nation leaders and also into a lot of First Nation communities and that. So with that, because I think in our presentation, as you see, and some of you have been at the focus meetings, because really we're trying to really discuss any of the issues around band membership, citizenship, and of course Bill S-3 as related to the Descheneaux, which we'll get into. We do want to focus in on, of course, the removal of the 1951 cutoff from the Indian Act, the implementation date, when is that going to take place? What are there any resources that are going to be provided to Canada or by Canada to First Nation communities, and looking at that. We're also looking at the remaining inequities related to registration and membership under the Indian Act. Issues that are really dear to our heart related to adoption, second generation cutoff rule, unknown and unstated paternity. And I think, Cheryl, you set the stage in your opening, our opening remarks, because that's what we're trying to hit home on this, that we have been affected. Enfranchisement, border crossing, categories of Indian registration, gender identity, registration of same-sex parents, and deregistration. We all know about Bill C-31 that came down in 1985, but we still feel the effects of that. And going through a lot of the data that has been presented, it still will continue to affect us, that had caused a rift in many of our families in Akwesasne because of Bill C-31, prior to that, because of the Indian Act. The Indian Act was imposed upon us. 2 things. 1, they wanted our land and resources. The other thing, put us on reserves and try to manage who's to be Indian. That is really disconcerting in that. And sometimes the inequities that arose from that are many. We've had many government officials during our negotiations with self-government, government officials, not just from CERC or whatever, Crown Indigenous Relations, Northern Affairs Canada, Department of Indigenous Services, but from many, many departments saying, we have not done a good job when it comes to First Nations people. We have to resolve those things. And this is one of them, one of the areas that we have to really look forward or look towards and focus in on membership. Because when we look forward, especially where we're engaged in self-government negotiations, this is going to impact us. And it should impact us because we do have our membership code, but as well as that, there's also a number of people from our community who are supposedly part of our community but have own status. Who are they? How do we sort of engage with them to have the opportunity, if they want to come under our membership code, they can. So these are questions that came out of the focus groups, and that we'll try to proceed. So with that, we'll start with the slideshow. I'll start it off. I think then Carol will jump in, Dolly, Jackie, any of you want to jump in, ask questions? How you doing? Again, the next slide, please, because really, if you look at the second paragraph, this is Canada's attempt to correct their mistakes with regards to membership status, registration under the Indian Act. There have been a lot of court cases. Descheneaux comes in quite significantly because it has to do with who's to be registered. How are they going to be a member? Abenaki community, when you put forward, of course, if people know where Abenaki is, it's in Odanak, right between Montreal and Quebec City. Slide 2. Because of Descheneaux, the amendments were introduced to address sex-based inequities related to differential treatment to cousins whose grandmother lost status due to marriage with non-status Indian prior to 1985. One of the things that came out, of course, that 1985 was supposed to correct a lot of those Native women that were taking off the rolls because they had married a non-Native or had married somebody from the southern portion of our community, which there were many here. But what was really interesting from my personal perspective is that there were a lot of non-Native women who prior to 1985 got full status, full membership with all the benefits. Has that changed? No, they're still full status. Also to address differential treatment to women who were from the Indian fathers between 1951 and 85. Again, it's something of a paternalistic idea. And then when we look at it, of course, through our history, we always try the maternal side of things with our clans. Totally different. But again, it's following a British system of who the father is, and then the relatives that follow from there. To address the differential treatment to minor children who lost both the Indian parents or to Indian mother because of lost entitlement to Indian status because their mother married a non-Indian after the birth. But also, let's not throw out the idea that those were the only ones. There were also residential school survivors who were taken off. And I think, Dolly, you also mentioned about if Dolly, and I'm not going to tell Dolly's age, but if Dolly went to school previously, before 1951, she could have been removed because she was going for her higher education. We had military veterans who lost their status. Because if they wanted to receive any veterans benefits, they had to enfranchise. And I think one of the biggest cases in Gittigan-Zibi right now is, what's his name, the senator?
Brazel?
Patrick Brazel. Because his father, of course, was in the military. And I've met Patrick when he was the head of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. Anyway, but those are issues that have come up. And then, of course, we had a lot of kids taken away from us on their 60s scoop. Where are they? How can we bring them under the fold? And these are the things, the questions that we have to talk about. And of course, when you're going to implement something, again, it comes back to who does the research? We need to do the research. We need to welcome them back. Section 6 of the Indian Act. This is a new section within the Indian Act. For all births recorded for persons born after April 17, 1985, and most Bill C-31 registrations, persons are registered either under the Section 6.1 or 6.2 of the Indian Act. 6.1 is an individual who has two parents who are registered and entitled to be registered under the Indian Act. 6.2 is an individual who has one parent who is registered or entitled to be registered under the Indian Act. Sex-based inequities include women who married a non-First Nations person and lost status, women and children with one First Nation parent, enfranchised, military, veterans, clergy, doctors. 60 Scoop, or the scooping up of 20,000 indigenous children for placement in foster homes or adoptions, residential schools created for the purpose of removing 150,000 First Nation children from the influence of their culture and assimilating them into the dominant Canadian culture. I know Truth and Reconciliation, when it came out a few years ago, tried to rectify those areas. You know, they made a lot of recommendations, and we're still waiting for Canada to start implementing a number of those recommendations. 1969 White Paper proposed ending the special legal relationship between the Indian Aboriginal, or between Aboriginal peoples and Canada, dismantling the Indian Act. Of course, that was rejected. Non-status Indigenous people such as the Métis. You also have a large non-status population and also the Métis. The Métis have not come under the Indian Act. They're trying to push forward to have their own Métis Act. I'll turn it over to Dolly to take you through the history of amendments to the Indian Act regarding sex-based inequities. And Dr. Carol LaFrance.
Thank you. Yes, I'm the one who burned lunch. We had a little incident, I did, in the kitchen. Okay. So, this is, we had 2 focus meetings already. We had one in Kana, we had one at Yohakio, and... yeah.
We had 3.
Oh, and 2 CKON radio shows also, which I thought we participated in. So a little history of the Indian Act. In the chart, it says 1869 to 1876. In reality, the Europeans, and I'm going to say Europeans, the Europeans started defining who was an Indian in 1851. And that was when they first said, you're Indian, you're not Indian. And in 1869, though, was the first time where they said, they introduced this thing called enfranchisement, where you could ask the government that you want to be a Canadian citizen, or you want to to be able to vote, and like what Peter was saying, to join the service, to Holy Orders, university. So you had to ask them for that. And if I want to say the Indian agent, but I don't think we had Indian agents in 1869. But and if the Indian agent decided that you could, then you were taken up. That was voluntary and involuntary enfranchisement. What happened also in 1869 was where they said, and it says on here, patrilineal rules of descent introduced. That means that our women lost status when they married non-natives, and flip it over, that our men married, when our men married non-native women, the women became status. Sex-based discrimination, that's the marriage, when our women married non-natives. And like Peter said, it's not that maybe our women didn't marry, it wasn't all non-native men that they married. It could be our people that reside in the southern portion here in Akwesasne, or it could even be our sister nations in the Haudenosaunee, like Onondaga or Oneida, or even further west, like our people that our women married. So they weren't non-natives, but according to Canada and Canada's definition of an Indian, they were non-Indians. And that's affected, and we're still feeling the effects of that to this day. And the term Indian was defined, so that was, so they had a definition of the Indian there. There were a few amendments over the years, but the big one was in 1951. So what they did then was they created, first they hired a person, they identified a person right in the Indian Act, the Indian Registrar, and that person was in charge of deciding who was an Indian and who wasn't under their Indian Act. And they also made a centralized list of all the, and I'm saying Indian because we're saying Indian Act, and I hope people aren't getting offended by me saying that, because at this point we're talking Indians under their Indian Act. And the creation of, so they made a centralized list, and they wrote down all the people who were eligible or entitled to be on the Indian Register. And so that was in 1951. Well, also what the 1951 legislation did was it introduced these new rules about illegitimate children, dealing with illegitimate children. And so they were treated different than legitimate children. There were some, they were treated differently. Some got status, some weren't. Some children, or the parents, or the moms actually, the moms had to provide more evidence, and they had to work harder and try harder to get their children registered than maybe their sister or their brother who had legitimate children. So there was that amendment there. But to make that even worse was that legislation made a difference. It said females and male illegitimate children were treated different also. In fact, in some cases, female illegitimate children were not eligible to be registered. So, and that's just how outrageous this law is, where you have a brother and a sister with the same mother and father, but the brother got registered, but the sisters didn't. And that was really in effect, and that was introduced in 1951. Another amendment that they made in 1951 was they introduced the double mother clause, and that just meant that again, when our men married a non-native woman, she became an Indian, and like an example would be like, so now their son marries a non-native woman, and they have children. So that just means that if that happened to you, if your mother and your grandmother was a non-native woman, then you lost your status. That was a double mother clause. That was one provision, though, that the Indian Act provided that any First Nations in Canada, they could opt out. They could apply to be exempt from that provision. I was surprised. I saw the numbers of the First Nations that applied to do that. There wasn't a lot of them. We were one. We did apply to opt out of that, and we were successful. We were successful in it. Well, not too many of us. Not too many First Nations in Canada opted out of that. So then along comes Bill C-31, April 17, 1985. When I do a little bit of training with, when we have new membership boards, or even with community members, or different programs, or and staff, I make that a test to them. I say, and what's the date? And they have to tell me April 17, 1985. Because that date is very important. You can't just say 1985, you have to say April 17, because a lot of things change on that date. So Bill C-31, which was approved, came into effect on April 17, 1985. It provided for the reinstatement of all our women that lost status because they married so-called non-natives. And it also provided for the first time for the registration of their children. That was called the first generation children. So our women, and then when you think about this, you got to think about these are, like our first speaker was talking about, they're not strangers, they're not categories, they're not invisible people. They are, you got to think about, these are our people, these are our aunties, these are our grandmother's sisters, these are our cousins. These are real people, and as we're going through this, try to, if you can think of somebody that, well, I think this is my auntie. This is probably what happened to my auntie. The other thing that happened was now nobody gains or loses status through marriage. So now when our men married a non-native woman, she didn't gain status. And that's why I say April 17th. So if he married her on April 16th, she became an Indian. If they got married on April 17th, she did not. She didn't become an Indian. So that's what's very important here. The other thing about Bill C-31, though, it did provide a protection that none of these changes could go retroactive. So those non-native women, they don't lose their status. They retain that, and they retain all the rights. They took out enfranchisement. So now you couldn't even, if you didn't want to be an Indian, you couldn't even apply to not be an Indian. It also provided that all our people that were enfranchised voluntarily, involuntarily, it provided that they could all be reinstated, and their children. In most cases, it would be their children. The other thing it did, Bill C-31, it created categories. Prior to April 17, 1985, you were Indian, you weren't. There was no such thing as half, there was no such thing as you're Indian, you weren't. But now they created categories. Now we're categories of Indians. And the other thing that I need to make sure that we all understand as we're going through this is there's no such thing as blood quantum in Canada. And like what we were mentioning in our focus meetings, we're also the government or the elected government on the southern portion of Akwesasne, the St. Regis Mohawk tribe, they go by blood quantum. So that just adds in the mix there. And so, but here in Canada, under the Indian Act, there's no such thing as blood quantum. So they made us into categories. But what it also did too, it said, it provided for something called the second generation cutoff. So now this is going forward. So now you can see that there's an ending. At some point, your grandchildren are not going to get Indian status. So that's something you have to be mindful of. You have to, and that's something that your children have to be mindful of, that at some point, your grandchildren are not going to get Indian status. It also provided for the for First Nations for the first time since 1851. We can decide who our members are. And that's where they came, they made us into Section 10 bands, who are the First Nations that decided to assume control of their membership, and the Section 11 bands, who are the First Nations who decided to leave it with the government, with Indian Affairs. We are a Section 10. Back in 1985, Akwesasne, they worked hard. There was a committee struck, and back then the community said they wanted to have a membership code. We wanted to control our membership, and the committee had 2 years. All the First Nations had 2 years to do this and to get it approved, and we got ours in on time. There was a deadline set. We got ours in on time, and it was approved by the Indian Affairs
Register.
or whatever these are called now. And okay, so then there was that. So now along comes Bill C-3. We call it MacIver, and I think we touched on it earlier. There was this lady called Sharon MacIver, and she's from British Columbia First Nation. And basically, she said, how come my brother, if I had a brother, how come his children get status but mine don't? And we have the same parents, we have the same grandparents. And so when she took it to court, the court decided that, they found that she was right, that her rights were being violated, and so they provided that basically they changed the Indian Act to provide for another generation. So now our grandchildren, so now our women who lost status, so their children, their first generation, and now their grandchildren get status. So that was Bill C-3. And the other thing it did was it introduced this 1951 cutoff. And what that means is that they said anyone born in 1951, they could get their, okay, I get confused on this, and we're going to ask you about that later to really clarify, nail down what this cutoff, what the 51 thing means. But basically, if you were born prior to this date in 1951, you could not get registered if your mother lost status through marriage. And what happened was you had families where you had a woman, like say she was born, maybe she got married to a non-native in, like say 46, and she had 5 children. Some of her children got reinstated, some of them didn't. Yeah, or her grandchildren.
No, they all got registered.
Okay, well, what's, okay.
It's if she had a sister who had children after.
After.
All before 51, and then those children would be registered.
The befores and the afters, so it's like being the same family. Oh, okay, I get it. Very confusing. The other thing that it did was, okay, so that's that. So then again, so it changed in 2017, and it was covered earlier about Descheneaux, about these people up in Odanak. And it went and it tried to fix all the previous, for the last 160 years. It tried to try to fix all the inequities in that. So now it's a little bit more even. It's a little bit more everyone's we got all new, a whole bunch more categories of people. But basically, and I like how Jackie told us, she heard it, they're really just ways to count. Is that?
To make it easier for the data entry.
Yeah, for data entry. So, but so things that happen now that for Descheneaux is unknown or unstated parentage, and that's one of the questions that will be in one of the in one of the breakout sessions, is to discuss that, the unstated parentage, and and going forward, how much do we want to stay with the second generation cutoff, or do you want to change it so your grandchildren will get their Indian registration? Do you want to, what's going forward, and to discuss some of the other issues that were brought up, like that were brought up at the focus meetings. And I think that's it. Wait, I think there's one more. No, that's it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sure.
Yes, no?
Go ahead.
I see some different wording in some of the stuff. So in Bill C-31, 1985, I'm reading down the list here. It says reinstatement of women who marry out and their children. Was that an automatic reinstatement? Like, or did people have to apply? Like, I don't understand. There's two different wording. In Bill C-31, it says reinstatement, and in Bill C-3, it says additional generation descendants of women who were married became entitled. Like, what's the difference between like somebody who was reinstated and then somebody who was entitled?
It's all done by application process. So anyone who feels that they're eligible or feels that they're entitled to get their Indian status, either way, like either way that they lost it or feel that they're entitled, then no, it's all application process, and it all goes to headquarters and to Ottawa. And in 2011, they actually opened another office in Manitoba to deal with all the applications that they anticipated receiving for all the applications that they're going to get for the grandchildren. They actually opened a whole other office in Manitoba for that. And but no, it's all application process. You have to provide all your documentation. I know it says entitled, but you do have to apply. You have to provide birth certificate. You have to provide proof that you are descended from this lady from the 50s.
But in the C-31 in 1985, those people who were on, or their children, they were automatically reinstated?
No, they had to apply.
There was a
Why would the legislation, or maybe this isn't coming right from the legislation, this wording, why would somebody who is reinstated have to apply? Even now, if we use that wording, something came out of the Bill S-3 or some of the stuff that we're talking about now, like if somebody's reinstated, you're back in, you know? If you are entitled to be back in, that I can see, that probably talks about putting an application in and maybe providing some proof.
I could answer why we use those words. So when C-31 was introduced, they used the word reinstatement because the government had a list of all the women that were removed from ban lists or lost status. So those women had to apply and then they'd be reinstated. So we had a definitive population of those women. When C3 came through, we didn't have that definitive list because we didn't know who the descendants were. So we just said they will be entitled if that level of generation exists within that particular family tree. We couldn't simply just reinstate non-existent people. We didn't know who they were. That's why we used those two different types of language, or those two types of words.
But the women in the state of C-31, they basically applied, but they were pretty much automatically in.
They have to apply.
You had to apply, and like I said, for 31 reinstatees, we had the documents already at the department. So so they would just be reinstated under 61C.
Do you know how many of the Bill C-31, your list that, were there a number of women that never reapplied or never?
There is a number. I don't have that number. There are a lot of women who just simply didn't want to be reinstated. They just
Or didn't know about the?
That's a possibility that they didn't know about the change, but there are a lot of women who just didn't want to. I know those women. They just made that choice themselves. They felt that they made a decision to walk away from the reserve and not go back, so they didn't want to be reinstated, nor their children or grandchildren. And that grandchild is my best friend, and that's the family tree that she comes from.
Maybe Vincent, from a personal perspective, I also know of women who were taken off the rolls prior to Bill C-31, and they were somewhat ostracized by community, for marrying a non-native, marrying a white man, let's put it that way. And it opened up a lot of wounds. There had to be some type of healing process, and it took them a time to really get through that whole process. And there were delays, but there was also a time frame set up that you had to try to come forward to be reinstated. And also at the time, the Canadian government was estimating probably around 80,000 would come back, but there was more. And because they weren't even set up at that time to look at all the funding requirements that were going to be, the resourcing that's going to be required to do so. And it's also looking at this too, there's still a question of funding requirements, but opening up old wounds was a tough one, and that, so. Oh. Chief Connie Lazor from the beautiful community of Snai.
Okay, so, thank you, Vincent, for your comments. It's quite interesting that you put a time frame on to reinstate what was the right we were born with. And government entity decided to take that away because you married a non-native. So I really think you should look at that time frame on that was established when they were to be reinstated, because to me, if you took that right away from me, why would I go back to be reinstated? That hard feelings that Peter just spoke about along with the federal government as well. Because we were born with that right, and some non-native took it away and then tells us they can reinstate me. I would literally tell you where you could go with that concept. And fortunately, I didn't have to go through that, but I do feel bad for the women that did go through that. When you turned around and you kept a status to those non-natives that married a native person, you should have taken that away. If you wanted to take something away, that's what you should have also made away. The status to non-natives that have married a native, kept that after this. You guys keep correcting things, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to say you guys, but the federal government keeps correcting things, but they don't go full gamut. You've got to correct it all, or don't bother, because you're talking about, they constantly talk about the money. Well, if you take that status away from those non-natives, you can give it back to the ones that are entitled to it, the money that belongs there. I just get frustrated hearing the same story and the same result. We suffer, we have to jump through the loops, we have to do all this to get our rights, our entitlement, wipe the wheel, and nothing is taken away from them. You gotta fix that.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of know about this, number 10, section 10, and then Bill mentioned in the membership group. Now, prior to 1951, there was a register, right? They took control of the Department of Indian Affairs, took control of your being registered as an Indian.
In 51?
Right? Yes. Okay. Prior to that, we were registered in 1951, because I still have papers here to prove that I was registered as an Iroquois of St. Regis. We all were. We were all registered. Now, C-31 came along, 1985, and then you proceeded to do a membership code in 1987 in June, right? You passed a membership code, which says now you're a Mohawk of Akwesasne, but yet we're still registered in Ottawa as Iroquois of St. Regis, because we were all registered prior to 1951. So I'm kind of asking the question, if you're a member to code, the membership code, and you're registered in 1951 as an Iroquois of St. Regis, so now you got two identities. So what are you gonna do with the new people coming in? Is it gonna be, is it just gonna be under the membership? Because they're not gonna be registered. We're still registered in Ottawa. And Pete, according to your nation building process, it sounds to me like it's gonna stay in Ottawa.
That's a question that we'll have to talk about.
And it says the names in the Indian register prior to April 17, 1985 will remain. That's telling me that we're going to stay registered in Ottawa as Iroquois of St. Regis. I just went up last year and I asked them and printed out my paper and said, no, you're registered as Iroquois of St. Regis. They had my parents, my grandparents, my wife, my kids were all registered as Iroquois of St. Regis. But now you made this code. So the new people in Bill S-3 that's coming in, are they just going to be members under your code? Because I don't know if you have another registry group in Ottawa that says we're registered as Mohawk of Akwesasne. You know, it's really confusing.
No, they don't have to apply, no. If they want to be under that membership code, they have to apply. And if they don't want to, then they don't apply.
So you're relying on the membership code. But
No,
see,
no. If they want to be, then they can apply. If they don't want to be, then they don't. It's like they don't go on automatic, that's what I'm
So what
saying.
happens, I'd like to ask Canada this. I'd like to ask you, why is it, I went to Ottawa and I proved the paper that on the Iroquois St. Regis registered. That's what we were prior to 1985. There's a resolution that was passed in 1985 to make a name change on the band. But they didn't change the identity of the people. We have a right to self-determination. We have a right to self-identify. So my question is, like, why can't we get a status card that reflects our identity? I went and I've asked that question in Ottawa, and they printed out a card for me, and it came back, Mohawks of Akwesasne. And on the application, and I proved it, that we're Iroquois of St. Regis. There's a conflict in there. So if we can't settle between what are we, Iroquois of St. Regis, you're a Mohawk of Akwesasne, or who are these people going to identify themselves as? Because you've got thousands of people still registered as Iroquois of St. Regis. And in your Indian Act, the definition has never changed, has always been that the reserve is to be held for the use and benefit of Indians in this act. Reserves are held by Her Majesty for the use and benefit of the respective bands of which they were set apart. And at the time the Indian Act came out in 1876, it referred to us from the Iroquois people, you know, the St. Lawrence Iroquois. And when the status cards came out, you know, bless his heart, after they shot Jake Fire in 1899. The thing is that when they give us issued status cards, they were all issued to everyone here as Iroquois of St. Regis. I know everybody got scared in C-30 when C-31 came out in 1985. Everybody got scared and said, "Oh, what are we going to do? Because they're all going to come in, this and that. We have to build a code." But you could have done that without changing the identity of the people.
So that would be a recommendation, is to change the code and put the wording in that people find that everyone will agree on.
Yeah, because where's that put
There you
us?
go.
We're still registered in Ottawa,
And then
in
we
your
can change it.
department.
And put it
as
right in
Iroquois
there.
of St. Regis. So I mean, it's really confusing.
Good idea.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. LaFrance and Dr. White. Good ones. We're, in our questions, we're looking at, especially when we're going to have the breakout session on stream 3, if you want to jump forward to slide 15. Those are questions that we still have to resolve. I like the idea of it's an administrative function, or how we want to change our membership code to Iroquois of St. Regis or Iroquois of Akwesasne or Mohawks of Akwesasne. We still have to try to work with that. And I know that our membership board is also looking at too, as far as amending the membership code. But if you look at slide 15, you go to it, should Akwesasne take on the exclusive responsibility of determining membership? We still have to answer those questions. Why or why not? 2, what do you see as the federal role in the process? What would you recommend as the next steps going forward? So those are questions that still have to come, but I'm glad you brought it up, Dave, because those are things that are really, we have to focus in on. But I'd like to turn it over to Dr. McDonald And she'll take us through this next slide, starting with slide 7. Thank you.
Actually, slide 9.
What happened to 7?
I'm going to get to it.
Oh, okay.
Actually, you might recognize that slide, Chad. Yes, some of what we're talking about today is from your presentation. I guess it's our twist on it. I'm going to move this microphone a little bit. Is that okay? Okay, so again, the reason that we're here is to talk about the collaborative process on Indian registration, band membership, and First Nation citizenship. And I know a lot of us don't like that word. I'm very happy to see Claudette. And actually, Chad, his uncle, is a long time friend of mine, Vinny Kiknaswe. And so we've known each other for many years. And I think maybe Claudette and I might have been in Ottawa around the same time in the 1970s. Yeah, I came in the 70s, so see, I'm aging myself. Anyways, so I wanted to skip ahead a couple slides and then go backwards. And Claudette did a very good job of explaining kind of the collaborative process in terms of how it evolved. And again, the process began, well, it says 2011 in terms of the exploratory process. And then the co-design input was collected in between 2017 and 2018. And I wanted to explain that. The Grand Chief mentioned that we had done a membership review last year, and I was the consultant for that, and we looked at the strengths and weaknesses of the membership code at that time. And we also had done a survey in the community and online. And as part of that survey, we applied for funding for the exploratory process for this collaborative review of registration and membership. And we did provide a submission to the government in terms of how we saw the collaborative process for Akwesasne rolling out. And you know, we've talked a few times already about our focus groups that we had in each district, and then also the community engagement that we're doing today. There is, and I don't know if you picked it up at the door, but there was a quick little literature review that I did as a kind of to inform this process for us within the Mohawk Council, but also for the community. And we did look at, you know, some of the research that's already been done in terms of, there was and Claudette had mentioned there was a report that was done to Parliament. Was that last June or last year? Last May. And then there was regional events, and then as she indicated, they're ongoing. And then there's the online consultation and the online survey, and then the expert panels and the provincial input. One of the things that Peter keeps pointing out is that I'm a doctor, and if I had been a doctor in the 50s, I would have been enfranchised. You know, that was a given. And but one of the things, it's not a criticism, but it's an observation. This issue is very complicated. You know, if you see some of the information that's on the government website, even myself with all my titles have a hard time to follow all of it because of, you know, the lineage and the wording. And so, you know, we've worked very hard to decode that for you and for ourselves in terms of what does this all mean. And then we've worked very hard to capture your voices in the last 3 focus groups. And our report is due on March 15th. And so we'll be, you know, sharing what we've heard so far. Now we'll go to slide 7. And slide 7 talks a little bit about what is Bill